everybody. I'm Howard Tiersky. Welcome again to the Winning Digital Customers Show. Well, it is graduation season, and it is a special graduation season for me because my daughter Jessica is graduating from high school. Some of you heard on a prior live cast, I talked about some of my adventures in helping her find a college to go to. So she's now committed to the University of Vermont, and in a few weeks, we will be attending her graduation from high school. And it got me thinking about the topic of graduation and how it relates to both what we do from a digital transformation perspective, we meaning all of us, and also something that's been on my mind for a long time, which is what if someday someone asks me to give a graduation speech? You know, I feel like that's such a tough job. No one's ever asked me, and maybe no one ever will. But, you know, I've heard many graduation speeches in my life, my own and my older daughter and others that I've been asked to go to, cousins and nephews and nieces and all that. And it's hard to give a great graduation speech, right? It tends to be a lot of the same stuff over and over. Believe in yourself. You can do it. Things like that. So I want to share with you, though, I feel like there's one key thing that I've learned from my own career that I never hear people talk about. It's a piece of advice that I give to graduates. I never have heard it from anyone else. Doesn't mean no one else is saying it, but I've never heard it. And so I thought I'd share it with you guys today. I realize many of you are not graduating. Most of this audience is experienced professionals, but might even interest you anyway. And who knows, maybe it'd be thought-provoking and something that you may want to pass on to others, or feel free to steal it if you get asked to give a graduation speech as well. So I'm prepared. I want you to be prepared. You know, but I think before I get into that, I think one thing about graduations that is interesting in the context of digital transformation is transformation, you know, tends to be a slow process. We rarely see a transformation that happens instantly or overnight. And that's true in our own companies. You know, we're building new capabilities. We're bringing out a minimum viable product. Things typically don't change overnight. It's a slow progression. And so it is with learning. You know, I bring my kid to preschool. And there's this sort of gradual process. And, you know, eventually they graduate college or law school or medical school or whatever level they decide to leave, formal education. And you don't see from one day to the next this massive change typically. And in fact, when you reach the day of graduation, it's not really true that the kid knows a ton more after graduation than before. My daughter probably knows 99.9% now of what she's going to know when she graduates high school in a few weeks. And yet she's not graduated yet. So we create these somewhat artificial markers in time, these milestones, and we say, hey, you've reached this stage. Let's celebrate. Let's have a ritual. Let's have an occasion. Let's acknowledge what we've accomplished. And I want to suggest to you that this is a really, really good thing to do. It gives people a near-term goal they can shoot for, the next graduation, and it acknowledges progress. And so in the transformations that we lead at our own organizations, let's remember to do that as well. Remember that it's going to, yes, you may have a launch of the new app or a redesign of the website, but even those probably in most cases won't be overnight transformational. It's all one step at a time. But it is good to define milestones, and when everyone's worked hard to make it to those milestones, make sure you stop and celebrate. And this kind of goes to the main thing I want to talk about today, it's also a natural time for reflection about the future, which is, by the way, another good reason to have milestones. Because if you're constantly just focusing on what you got to get done today, the next day, and you never take a moment to step back and look at how far you've come, you also may not have that moment when you're inspired to say, where do I really want to go next? Not the next step I want to take, but the big picture next vista that I want to get to, the next milestone that I want to achieve. So that's another benefit of having these rituals like graduation. But of course, when someone sits in a graduation ceremony, they're expecting to hear something inspiring from the speaker about thinking about where they're going next, right? Because this is what's usually on people's mind. What should my career trajectory be? Where should I be going with my life? What should my next steps be? Things like that. And so this kind of goes to the key piece of advice that I want to share with you. Uh-oh, I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. So first of all, I realize, of course, very often when people graduate, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go get a job. Sometimes you're graduating, like my daughter, from high school, and the next thing she's going to do is go to college. And that's, by the way, not just going to cost pennies, right? It's going to cost dollars. Although I thank her for choosing a state school. She had many options, and she chose a school that wasn't at the top of the cost list. My older daughter is at Dartmouth, and that's just about as expensive as any school gets. So my middle second daughter, Jessica, who I'm also extremely proud of, has saved me a few bucks, but choosing the school that she felt was right for her. Awesome, awesome school, awesome place, by the way. In any case, but I'm really speaking to the moment when you start to head off into the working world, when you start to get your first real job, not the job at Starbucks you have between classes. And for some, that real job may be something they do during college. It's certainly possible. But for many, it's going to be that moment when they've graduated either from their bachelor's degree, or even if they decide to move on and get a master's or a law degree, whatever, when you actually move into the real first job that's setting you off in the direction of your career. And so the question is, what direction to head? A lot of people are mostly just trying to find a job. A lot of times it's like, what kind of job do you want? I just want a job. Get me my first job. But actually, this is a strategic moment, and a moment that I think is sometimes under-considered in terms of what direction someone should head with their career. And you have, a lot of times you feel powerless when you're at that age. You feel like, I'm just this kid. I've just graduated from school. I'm interviewing at all these places. All the power is on the other side of the desk. But the truth of the matter is that when you are graduating, you have a capability that many, many other people in the workforce do not have, which is that you can work cheap. You can work cheap. You can go into an entry-level job. That's what you're expecting to do, right? You're not expecting to start as a senior vice president or something like that. Now, why is that important? It's because it can give you more choice about what type of environment you want to work in. And this is coming to the key piece of advice that I'm going to talk about today, which is the focus on where you are, not what you do. Where you are, not what you do. And I will, don't worry, explain that. But the reason I'm talking about money right now is that at this point in my life, many of you know, I run a company, and I often get approached by people looking for jobs, and we give a lot of people jobs. Actually, we're hiring right now. We've hired probably 15 people in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So absolutely hiring people all the time. But there's one hiring situation that comes up a lot that I always feel bad about, which is people will come to me, senior people. And by the way, we're always looking for senior people as well, not just entry-level people, people who've been in their careers for 15, 20 years. Tremendously accomplished people, and they have an interest in working with my company, but they may come from another industry, another area. They may, for example, have worked for a big media company, and they rose up the ranks and they became very senior. And now they're leaving there for one reason or another, and they're looking for another job. Well, one of the challenges for me is, while I may be super impressed with this person, my business, even though we work with a lot of media companies, we're an agency and a consulting firm, we're in a particular industry. We work for a variety of industries, but we work in our own industry, which is a professional services business. And when someone comes to me at that point in their career and wants a job, I have a real conundrum. And the conundrum is this. They may be incredibly accomplished individuals, and they may have tremendous amount of knowledge, but they don't know my business. I don't mean my personal business, the specific company, but they don't understand at that point in their careers typically how we make money, how our business, this type of business operates. And, if I were hiring them in as a kid for $40,000 a year or whatever, I wouldn't be so concerned about that. We teach them, after all, they're just coming in to be given tasks. But people at that stage of their career, they aren't looking for a job for $40,000 a year, right? They have an expensive home and a mortgage, and like me, kids in college or about to go to college, and they have a lot of expenses. And so they may be making decent six-figure salaries at wherever job they're coming from. And now I don't have an on-ramp for them because they're not going to want an entry-level job to learn. And I can't afford to hire someone at that level, usually. There are always exceptions, that doesn't really understand my industry. And this problem of trying to hop from one type of job to another, and particularly one industry to another, is a common one. There's a lot of people who get to a certain point in their careers and they realize, I'm not sure I'm doing what I really want to be doing, and they want to change, but they don't want to take a big step backward. And so this goes to the core point I want to talk about, which is focus on where you want to be, not what you want to do. And by the way, this is, I think, a key mistake that I made in my own career, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as well. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you, the typical graduation speech, follow your passion, right? Figuring out what kind of job to get. Presumably you've done some of that in choosing your major and choosing kind of your educational choices along the way. But now when you're going out into the world, follow what it is you're passionate about. And by the way, there are many majors, many graduating degrees where you can go in a lot of directions. I mean, let's say you graduate with a software development degree. Well, you could work for a big hospital chain working on their billing system. You could go to Silicon Valley and work for a startup creating a new social media application. You could go work for NASA programming the next space shuttle. I mean, is there another space shuttle? Well, whatever NASA is working on right now, the mission to Mars. Point is, and the same is true for many, many, many different jobs. Lawyers can work in so many different ways. Engineers, do you want to be an engineer designing, little nano robots, or do you want to be an engineer working on giant buildings, or et cetera? Movie sets need engineers to make sure everything's structurally sound. So you have many directions you can go, even though you have a particular skill. And so my suggestion, my piece of advice is really figure out where it is you want to be. Because, and sometimes people say, well, and what do I mean? Let me just jump ahead and say, what do I mean by where I want to be? I mostly mean what industry you want to be. And you could take that several ways. You could take it in terms of a location. You want to start your life. You want to start your family. My wife and I had friends when we were in graduate school who decided right after graduate school to move to Hawaii, and they built their life in Hawaii, and they have a beautiful, wonderful life in Hawaii. Now, I have no regrets living in the New York City area, but if I decided at this moment in my life that I wanted to move to Hawaii, it would be kind of problematic. I've got kids, they're in school, my wife has a job here, So in a similar way that the where of where you want to live, it's great to make that decision early. Not that you can't change it later, but it can be challenging to change it later for the reasons I just mentioned. The same is true of the industry that you work in. And just as I mentioned earlier, it might seem like, well, but I've already decided I've got a degree as a doctor, I've got a degree as an engineer, I've got a degree as a software developer, I've got a degree, in whatever it may be. The truth of the matter is there's still a wide range of directions that you could potentially go with that degree. And the reason this is so important is because when you're first starting out, people are often hiring you for the skill that you have. And again, as I said earlier, you can work cheap. So you have software development skills, you have graphic design skills, whatever, and they want to buy those skills. And you're willing to work cheap, so you're going to come in. But what happens is when you work in a particular place, let's say you're a graphic designer, and let's say you get a job working in the video game industry, doing graphics for video games. And you're there for 15 years. And what has happened at that time is now you've learned probably more about graphic design, but you've also learned a ton about video games and how to do graphics for video games and how to work within the teams that are involved in creating video games, which aren't only graphic designers, right? You understand the broader process of producing video games. And now you're very valuable to that video game company or another video game company, because you don't just understand design, you understand in the context of the industry. If you follow what I mean by an industry, that's an industry. Now, let's say another designer leaving school with the exact same education decides to get a job doing package design for Procter & Gamble. And that same person spends 15 years designing packages, cardboard boxes, the new bottle for Scope, the new tube for Crest or whatever. Well, similarly, you've learned a lot about working in a giant consumer packaged goods company like Procter & Gamble. You've learned a lot about this particular type of design. 15 years later, if you think, I really didn't follow my passion. What I really love is video games. I'm a graphic designer with 15 years experience. I should go to the video game industry and say, hey, hire me as a graphic designer with 15 years of experience. Well, how do you think you compare to the designer who's been in the video game industry all those years? Well, it's that same problem I mentioned earlier. And this is why the where is so important when you start your career. I would say as well that it's more important to be where than where you want to be, the environment or the industry that you are passionate about, than to do exactly what it is you want to do. So, for example, I'm going to use myself as an example. It's a little bit complicated in my case, and I don't want to get into all the details. I graduated actually with a degree in theater, but I got a job in, just similar to the example I just gave you, in graphic design. But this is not specific to just design. As I mentioned earlier, this could be true if you're an engineer or a computer programmer or even a doctor or a lawyer. There are a lot of different types of doctors, different roles lawyers play, et cetera. And so I got a job. I really wanted to do a job. I really wanted a job doing very creative graphic design type work. And the first job that I landed, and at that time, I think I made a kind of a classic mistake. And fortunately, luck fixed my mistake. but I wouldn't count on it, in other situations. The job I got, if you can believe it, was as a designer at an accounting firm. Well, that was the job that I got. I interviewed, they hired me, and I was looking for a job. I didn't want to be unemployed. So I got this job and I started working at this accounting firm. And I made the most of it, right? Most of the design team there, they were working on sort of very boring charts and graphs. And I was this person who really wanted to do things that were creative and experiential. And what was cool about it is that made me unique. And I brought a lot of thinking around different things to that accounting firm. But let's face it, I was doing graphic design at an accounting firm. And had luck not shifted things for me, imagine I spent 10 years, 15 years doing that kind of work in an accounting firm. And then I went to an advertising agency and said, hey, I'm a graphic designer. I think it would have been pretty hard to make that shift. And of course, I would have wanted more money than I could have done earlier. Had I been a little more patient and found the job that was a little closer to my passion, even if it wasn't doing graphic design, I would advise someone if it's like the old adage of start in the mailroom. You want to be an agent, start in the mailroom. And it's like, well, what is working in the mailroom at a talent agency have to do with being a talent agent? Well, the reality is you're probably better off starting in the mailroom at J. Walter Thompson. Oh, that's an advertising agency. Sorry. What am I thinking of? Well, I don't know. Let's say Columbia CAA, right? You're better off starting in the mailroom because in the mailroom, you're going to learn the business, right? You're going to understand, especially if that's your goal. You're going to learn to understand what's going on at that organization. And you're going to be able to then see and find opportunities to shift and change the what you're doing because the where is right. But if you start doing what you want, like me in an accounting firm, doing design work, but in the wrong environment, then you're not going to be in an environment where you're going to learn those things. I think there's a couple of challenges that people have when maybe they hear this advice or when they think about wanting to follow what it is that they want. One is they feel they don't know what they want. They might say, I'm really not sure, Howard. You're talking like I know exactly what I want to do, but I don't. I understand. A second problem that people have is they feel that they can't get there, right? They feel that, to hell with my slides. They feel like they're not quite sure what the path is to getting there. And also they fear failure. If there's something you want so much, I really want to work in the animation industry and I'm so passionate about it that I almost am afraid to proceed because if I fail, if I get turned down, I'll be so heartbroken. So it's almost easier to go to another industry that you're not as in love with because it's easier to tolerate rejection. The reality is in any career, you're going to have rejection, whether it's rejection for a job, failure at a project you're working on. I mean, that's an inevitable part of any type of career. So these three problems, not knowing what it is that you want, not knowing, worrying about failure, and not really seeing the path to getting, if you started in the mailroom, what's the path to becoming an agent? If I went to an advertising agency and as a designer, but I started in the mailroom, what would be my path from the mailroom to becoming a creative director in an advertising agency? I mean, the answer is I don't know, but here's the thing. When you're in the right environment, when you're at the right where, you can figure all of those things out. Because consider this. Let's say you don't really know what job you want, but you love the entertainment industry, or you love healthcare, or you love financial services, or you love government, right? There are so many industries. And very often people who say they don't know what they want to do, it's because they don't know exactly what they want to do. But if you gave them a list of industries and say, if you could be a part of one of these industries, which one would you be passionate for? Most people will tell you, I wouldn't want to be in healthcare, but I would love to work in the entertainment industry, or vice versa. I had an interesting conversation once, I remember, when I was working at a large consulting firm with somebody. And at the time, I do a lot of financial services work even today. But at the time, the company that I was working for, a big consulting company, was really pushing me to do mostly work in the financial services industry. I had done digital strategies for like 6 different insurance companies. And so the company that I worked for was like, great, Howard's an expert at doing digital strategies for financial services. We're just going to have him do financial services. And I was like, oh, geez, if I do another insurance company strategy, I'll shoot myself. I don't feel that way now. But at the time, I just felt like financial services is boring, right? I mean, I wanted to be working, for example, in media and entertainment. And that is where I've spent a lot of my career these days, right? Working for a lot of big media companies. But at the time, I felt stuck in financial services. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because I had a conversation with somebody I remember who worked in the financial services group, who I was working with on a project. And I think we were out to drinks, and I was telling them this, and I was kind of bitching. And I was saying how I said, listen, to be honest, I find financial services boring. What I think is exciting is media and entertainment. I'd love to be working for a big television broadcaster or a cable company or a movie studio. To me, that sounds exciting. And this guy looked at me like I had two heads. And he's like, you are working in financial services right now. Money is what drives the universe. It's the center of everything. You want to go off and work on somebody that's making like some silly TV show? That's so frivolous. When right now what you're doing is at the heart of the universe. Money is the center of everything. And I thought, wow, he didn't persuade me at all. But I thought that's a really interesting perspective. And obviously that was his perspective. That was his passion. To him, there was no greater fulfillment than to work in the world of money and financial transactions. To me, it wasn't what I was passionate about. And so that figuring out of what it is that you're passionate about can put you in the right place. And see, when you're in the right place and you're sitting there in the mailroom or whatever it might be, and by the way, I'm not saying you have to start in the mailroom. You may be able to, with enough persistence, get yourself the right job, the right what, at the right place. That's great. But if you can't, if you have to make a choice like I did, I think I chose wrong. I chose the wrong place, but the right job. Because if you're in the right place and there's a maze and you're not sure how to get to where you want to go, you're there every day. You can sniff it out. You can look for those paths and opportunities, network, make connections. If you're in the right place and you fail, because you go for something, and you pitch your idea and it doesn't get approved, or you try to get that promotion and it doesn't happen, or you get asked to run a project and you run it and you screw it up. Well, that's not optimal, but that's going to happen no matter where you go. That is the nature. And if you want to go for what it is you want, you're going to fail. But the question is, what have you learned from those failures? If you're failing in an environment that's where you want to succeed, then those failures are going to teach you something that's going to enable you to succeed at what you want to do. If you're going into another environment, you're still going to have failures, I hate to tell you, but you're going to learn less valuable stuff from those failures because it's not going to teach you how to be successful at what it is you want. It's going to teach you how to be more successful at what it is and where it is that you don't really want to be. And you're still going to have that problem like the people I described earlier of jumping from thing to thing. And lastly, if you're just not really sure what it is you want to do, you say, well, okay, I know I want to be in healthcare, but I really don't know what job I want in healthcare. Well, if you get yourself a job in a hospital or some other healthcare environment, imagine you get yourself a job at a hospital and you're an orderly or you're some low-level person, the equivalent of starting in the mailroom. It's not very glamorous and it doesn't pay very well, but you're going to get exposed to all these different roles and say, oh, wow, respiratory therapist, or, oh, wow, this person that handles, was a social worker and works with families whose relatives are very ill, or you're going to have the opportunity to be exposed to all this granular understanding of what happens in that industry. And that is likely going to give you some kind of a insight. Because here's how I look at the figuring out your path through your career. My own personal belief, and I'll offer to you, and you can take it or leave it, I have no evidence, is that each of us is kind of implanted in our soul by, if you want to believe it's God or the universe or our DNA or whatever, but with some kind of mission, some reason we're here. And our passion, the thing that draws us to be excited about something, that's that inner part of us speaking to us and letting us know which direction ahead. But it's not always precise. Like I was saying before, sometimes it's just telling you head towards healthcare, head towards government. But it's just like any kind of aiming, as you get closer to something and you see it better, then you're in a better position to have that inner voice guide you more precisely. Sometimes you need what I call inner signals and outer signals. That voice that I was describing, or that feeling, it may not be a voice like God is talking to me, but this sense of what you're excited about. And then you see external signals, like you realize there's a job you never even knew existed, or you learn what it's like. And this happens the other way too, by the way. Some people think they want to be a lawyer, and then they do a summer internship at a law firm, and they're like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I figured that out. They had an inner thing that was sort of sending them in a direction, but when they actually got the outer signals, it didn't line up. And so what does that mean? It means that, well, maybe actually they do like law, but not the kind of law they just went to. Or maybe there's something that was moving them in that direction, but it turns out it's not towards being a lawyer, it's towards another role, whatever that may be. And obviously then you need to sort of continue to go through that process of listening to the inner voice and looking at the outer signals and trying to navigate your way. But again, if you're in the wrong place, then you're not getting the right outer signals. When you're in the right place, even in the wrong job, then you have this daily opportunity. It's like you have this inner sense, and then you have all this outer stuff that you're looking at and you're learning and you're seeing how business is done and what all the different roles and jobs are. And then from there, you're in a much better position to figure out where you want to go. And because you're learning more about that industry, you're more valuable within that industry, because it's one thing to hire a software programmer. It's another thing to hire a software programmer that understands banking if you are a bank. If you're a pharmaceutical company, a software program that understands banking is not necessarily that useful. So you can figure out your path better. You're more valuable as you learn more about the industry. And also you understand, especially within one company, how to work the company. You know, you're building relationships, you're learning how decisions are made, so that when you say, now I know where I want to go, you can say, I need to go out and get this certification in order to be able to get that job, or I need to get this person, this vice president, to really know who I am and like me so that they'll give me a chance, or I need to get put temporarily on this project to help them because that will give me an opportunity to learn even more about this aspect or that aspect of the business. If I'm an orderly, I have to try to get them to give me an assignment cleaning up the emergency room and not cleaning up the maternity ward, because ER medicine is what I'm really excited about. So I want to be kind of going in that direction. So you have the opportunity then to sort of work the system. So hopefully that makes sense. I know I might have, just like my slide here, I might have gone around a few circles here, but the net of it is, the big picture piece of advice that I would give to anyone kind of starting out in a career is, don't forget that the opportunity to work cheap gives you more mobility than you will have later in your career. So take advantage of it. Listen to that inner voice and really figure out the environments that you want to be in. Is it film production? Is it banking? Is it healthcare? Is it government? Whatever it may be. And even within that, if you can figure it out, and then get yourself there in any job you can, and take the wrong job for less money if you need to get there, rather than take the job that fits the job description that you want, but in the wrong environment. That's it. That's my graduation speech. I'll probably have to tighten it up. They're probably going to tell me I have like 8 minutes. So I'm going to have to tighten it up because I know what it's like sitting in graduation being bored listening to someone talk. In any case, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that's useful for you. I'd love to hear your comments or thoughts. If you agree, if you disagree, if it aligns with your experience, please put those in the comments, as well as any other advice you think we should be giving to graduates. Maybe you have a better idea. I'd love to hear that as well. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and see you next time on the Winning Digital Customers Show. Keep transforming.